Thank you. Thank you for that introduction. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great pleasure to be here today. I'd like to thank IFPRI, FAO, for inviting me here. I have a very simple task. My simple task is to tell you what an accelerator is. And by the time I finish that, it should all be clear and you can go on with the conference with a lot more clarity on the subject. Well, let's start by thinking about one accelerator that we're all familiar with, the accelerator in your car. So we know that the accelerator in your car creates transformative change. It gets you from one place to the other. But it can also get you into trouble when you press it too hard and you have the police chasing you and giving you speeding tickets. And so there are trade-offs when you have accelerators that you use and sometimes misuse. Now, how do I translate this to the topic we have today, accelerators for hunger and malnutrition? It's not as easy. It's not as simple to think about accelerators for hunger and malnutrition. So here's a way in which one can come up with a definition. This can be considered a zero draft definition. I'm sure if I put this to an FAO committee, we'll spend months and years debating the definition. And that's good. It's a way to get the discussion going. But let me get to start. To me, an accelerator is a specific technological intervention, a policy change, or institutional reform, and often a combination of all of them that leads to transformative change at scale in the sustainable reduction of hunger and malnutrition. That sounds like something a big committee came up with. Actually, it's something I just put together, drawing from the concept note from this conference. There are a couple of issues that I think are important to bring to your attention right at the beginning. Transformative change. When we think about transformative change for food systems, it's quite different from the way we thought about transformative change in the past. In the past, we thought of it in terms of one specific intervention around a specific commodity. Here, we are talking about a change in the whole food system, and therefore, we are talking about a transformation from a focus on quantity to looking at improved quality, improved diversity, and improved safety. I think that's crucial. Second, when we think about food systems and focusing on nutrition, then intersectoral synergies are absolutely crucial. We're no longer talking about transformation within a sector, but looking across sectors. And these are things that will continue to be part of my presentation, but of course will be throughout this conference, these discussions will go. Remember, we've been through part of a major transformation process in the last several decades. Imagine this region in the 60s and the state of this region in the 60s, when hunger was prevalent, malnutrition was high, poverty was high. But we've seen change happen, and change happened through the Green Revolution. And there are important lessons for us to learn from that Green Revolution experience. I think one of the fundamental lessons to me is that technology was crucial. It was necessary, but it was not sufficient for creating change. It was not the silver bullet that resulted in the transformation. In addition to the technology, you needed several other factors. You needed institutional change, you needed infrastructure improvements, etc. So it's not accidental that the Green Revolution happened only in places where irrigation, transport infrastructure, etc. were in place, such as in the Indian Punjab, Haryana, etc. It's not accidental that in China, even though they had access to the modern varieties, transformative change happened only after you went from a collective farming system to decollectivization and gave farmers the rights to produce and to sell their products. Similarly, it's easy to forget that just in 1990, Vietnam was a massive food importing country. But since then, Vietnam, within a decade, became a major food exporter. And they went through the same process as China, decollectivization, etc. But they also created clear tenancy rights for farmers. They opened up their markets. They created market incentives for enhancing productivity. And so you saw that change happening. And so the issue of infrastructure, institutions, markets, all come together along with technology in order to make that change happen. Of course, we all know that there were limits. There were significant limits to the Green Revolution. And I think one of the fundamental limits was interregional inequalities. When you look at where Eastern India is, where Western China is, where northeastern Brazil is, etc., these areas were left far behind. And we talk about the fact that they were left far behind because they were agroecologically inferior. Well, they were inferior relative to certain commodities. When you looked at these regions with the lens of rice and wheat and maize, they were inferior. What we failed to understand in the Green Revolution was particular agroecologies are good for particular crops. And if we only focus on 3, then you lose out on the opportunities for other crops to be produced in these regions. I think that's a fundamental lesson. This staple crop fundamentalism that we had during the Green Revolution is something we need to get beyond. And that's something that we need to think through today. Then, even as we address hunger, malnutrition continued to be a problem and continues to be a problem today, and we're going to be talking a lot more about that. And part of the reason it continues to be a problem is we did not focus on diversity. We did not focus on access to diverse foods, better quality food, more nutritious food. Our focus was very much on calories. So that transition is important as we look ahead. Third, intra-household equity gap. There's been significant differences in the benefit sharing between men and women in the household. And we know today that empowered women create transformative change in terms of overall household welfare and improved nutrition. And gender empowerment is a significant part of the change that needs to happen, and one that the Green Revolution missed out on. And finally, the environmental trade-offs. There's significant trade-offs, and we all know them. But we also know that many of the solutions to sustainable intensification are available today. We've not been using them, and we've not been using them primarily because the incentives to use these have not been in place. As long as subsidies are there, as long as there are various ways in which disincentives are created for farmers to adopt these new technologies, we don't see sustainable change happening. So today we are embarking on this massive global goal of zero hunger, zero malnutrition. It's a big ambition, but what's striking about it is hunger and nutrition are brought together for once. What's striking about it is smallholder productivity growth is seen as central to addressing the problem of hunger and malnutrition. And that's good. But as we try to address the Sustainable Development Goal, we also see that we are facing this massive storm of various competing challenges that we're facing. We've talked about some of them, about the urbanization issue, about the non-communicable disease issues, etc., and about climate change and climate change impacts. We don't talk enough about trade and the impact trade has on declining competitiveness of smallholder agriculture, and how do we address that? So coming up with ways in which we can address some of these big global challenges as we look at the SDGs is important. So what I'd like to do is to think about ways that we can reimagine the accelerators for food systems, the various ways in which we can think about them. I think one of the crucial ways to think about accelerators in the future is to focus on diversity. Focus on diversity in the food system, specifically looking at more nutrition-sensitive food, more nutritious food, etc. There are opportunities to look at various disruptive technologies. There are disruptive technologies in terms of soil fertility, using sensors for deciding what types of nutrients to apply, etc. Technologies for alternate sources of protein. We're talking about people going to Mars on Mars missions. But as you go on Mars missions, you need food. And there's a lot of innovative work going on long shelf life food for these long Mars missions. Imagine, once that technology is available, how would that change our way of eating and the consumption that we have and the way it brings us into the productions, into the mainstream consumption of these foods. I think looking at ways in which we can use these technologies is important. And what's crucial is that these innovations are happening outside the traditional colleges of agriculture. And we need to find ways in which we can access these new technologies. Similarly, the big data tools, the new ICT tools, and the way they're used for sustainable intensification. These tools are available, but they're not at a scale that you can have smallholder farmers to be able to use them. The challenge of scaling them down to smallholder agriculture is something that we need to be worried about and we need to be focusing our attention on. We need to be looking at ways in which we can leapfrog over traditional infrastructural constraints. I think some of the work going on solar power and irrigation systems is a wonderful example of leapfrogging. There are many, many more. Leapfrogging only happens if we create opportunities for leapfrogging. If we create opportunities for entrepreneurs to enter this market and to create new ideas and new innovations that can be used by farmers. And that's something where governments could play a big role in creating that environment. And also looking at safety net programs. We will continue to have people left behind. And we will continue to need safety nets, food-based or non-food-based safety nets. Targeting these individuals has been a major problem. Managing safety nets has been a major problem. But it can be done, and it can be done through better technologies and the ICT technologies that are available today. 2 minutes more, please. Finally, I want to bring in this whole issue of intersectoral synergy. What I have in front of you is the framework that I use in my institute to talk about intersectoral synergies. We know a lot about the role of productivity. We know a lot about the need for diversity in addressing malnutrition. But we also need to be equally cognizant about the important role that sanitation and clean drinking water play in addressing the problem of malnutrition. There's a whole group of people that look only at sanitation in addressing malnutrition, and that's important. And it's really important to look at the role of women, the empowerment of women, and the way empowerment in women leads to improved access to assets and improved decision-making at the household level in terms of what's produced, what's bought, and what's consumed. That will make a big change in overall malnutrition status, especially for children. I think one cautionary note, we've got a plethora of accelerators, but I'm worried we may be running into a fight about my accelerator is better than your accelerator. And I think that's not productive. I think we need to look at a way in which we can bring synergies and coherence across these accelerators. There are no property rights when we talk about hunger and malnutrition. It's all of our problem, okay? With that, let me thank you for your attention.